to put some faces with names of folks that I've really heard about. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to participate and share. I guess I would like to just build off of the previous speakers and the discussions that we've had so far, and highlight that this issue is not a problem of the rich. It's not a problem of the poor. It's a problem of society. And I really think that it's only when we start to think about these problems as societal problems that we're really going to move the needle on solutions. So what I would like to do is offer one perspective, a scientific perspective, because that's what I am, is just a scientist, and kind of how can science maybe inform some of the thinking that we're going to be engaging on for our hackathon. Next slide, please. I would like to propose to you all, and you don't have to buy my proposal, that science helps support solutions. So we've talked a little bit about some of the problems, some of the solution spaces. I would just like to kind of set the stage. We know that a lot of the stakeholders are silent in this situation. The Vaquita can't talk, speak English or any language that humans can understand. But a lot of the times we have human victims and human offenders, and they have limited or different societal interfaces. And this creates a complicating factor for us as we move towards solutions. A lot of the human behaviors that we're talking about here, the behaviors of the poachers, the traffickers, the law enforcement officials, the consumers, the criminal justice officials, they're all dynamic. Human behavior is not cross-sectional. It is not static. And we need to remember that sometimes, but not always, these behaviors are covert. And so we need to be critical in interpreting what the data that we see as we move from information to intelligence. One of the huge problems that we have in conservation is that our data are fragmented. Our data are not comprehensive, and there's a reluctance and ability to share data. This is not unique to Vaquita conservation. This is a societal problem. It's a scientific problem. But this is the state of affairs that we're working with. So just to add to the complexity. Finally, resources are limited: human capital, financial capital, intellectual capital. And so we need to be thinking about that as we move forward with these types of solutions. Next slide, please. So what I've been doing is thinking about interdisciplinary science. How can you pick and choose from different fields, different knowledge bases in support of solutions? Sometimes, like this Vaquita conservation issue, you have a conservation biology issue. It's great that we know the fecundity levels of these animals, the species distribution, their feeding ecology. That is paramount for the solution. It's important. But we also have a rule of law. We have social norms. We have the causes and consequences of social conflict that underlie Vaquita, the crime. And then we also have a risk and decision-making side of this. We need to assess the risks. The risks are not uniformly distributed across the landscape. Different people think about risks in different ways. And then also we have different ways of communicating risks and managing risks. And sometimes the way that we manage risks actually causes more problems than the actual risk itself. So these are really important aspects of the solution space. And then also we have criminology and criminal justice, which has something to offer. The idea that we can think about intelligence-led policing, strengthening our criminal justice and law, rule of law. And we can also think about, how do we promote compliance? How do we try to prevent these crimes from happening in the first place? Once the Vaquita and the Tatuaba are dead, they're dead. You can't bring them back. It's very different than like if my cell phone is stolen. I've backed up my data, I can pay to replace it. When we're dealing with natural resources, when it's gone, there's no replacement. So I would like to propose to you that an integrated scientific approach exists. It's possible to leverage in our hackathon, and it can help enable this holistic thinking that a lot of folks have discussed so far. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is offer a couple of scientific observations. This is an oversimplified model of wildlife trafficking in real life. Now, this is not what wildlife trafficking looks like in a virtual space. That's a whole other story. But in what we're talking about, what Andrea talked about, and what our legal scholars discuss, you essentially have this source section. You have a transit and you have a destination. You have a 3-stage model of wildlife trafficking. We overwhelmingly focus on the poaching side of things, but all of the stages are relevant and all of the stages are solution spaces for intervention. Next slide, please. The crime triangle is an idea that anybody can be an offender. Dr. Serrano could be an offender, Andrea Costa, myself. The idea is that any human being could be an offender. This is not the people whose brains are physiological different who are the mass murderers. This means that crime is an opportunity. Crime is an opportunity when 3 conditions overlap in space and time. You need a motivated offender, a suitable target, and a lack of guardianship. When these 3 conditions overlap in space and time, the opportunity for harm is created. So how do you prevent harm from happening in the first place? You break one edge of this triangle. Any one. Choose your own adventure. Where is your skill set? Where do you have partners? Do you want to focus on offenders? Do you want to focus on the defenders? Do you want to focus on the targets? So the crime of interest also may be a violation of the rule of law. Vaquitas are federally and internationally protected species. Their poaching is a criminal violation, but there are some individuals who may not view their death as being harmful. So it's really important to focus on all of these dimensions. This crime triangle enables us to focus on the crime, not the criminals, okay? Only. It enables us to think about both. There's essentially an unlimited number of offenders. There's an unlimited number of people that can come into play. So preventing these crimes from occurring in the first place is a method that is used all around the world, in the global north, in the global south, in urban areas, in rural areas, and it enables us to focus on the crime of interest in addition to all harms. Next slide, please. I'd like to also acknowledge that current thinking from conservation criminology encourages us to think about crime-place interactions. So there's really at least 4 places and spaces that are involved in the process of crime commission. All of them can be targeted as solution spaces. The first site is the crime site. This is a specific place where crime occurs. This could be where the vaquita dies. It could be where the Tatajuaba bladder is dried. It could be where it's trafficked. It could be where it's consumed. But this is your crime site. There's other places to think about also that are really important. Convergent settings are public places where offenders routinely meet. This is kind of where offenders go when they're not offending. This is an exceptional place to intervene. I don't know if anybody has a family member or a kid that is constantly watching television. They are not focused on you. I'm projecting myself as a parent here. My kids don't listen to me when they're watching TV. They won't listen to me. But if I go to them when they're not watching TV, it's a lot easier to reach them. So this idea of going to other places to try to intervene can be really useful. There's also corruption spots. These are places that encourage criminal activity in other spaces. And so we've talked a little bit about how the Tatajuaba trafficking has other convergent spots with other types of crime: human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering. And these are also places to target. And then the fourth space, which is really important, are these comfort spaces. These are the private meeting, supplying, and staging spaces and places where, offenders go throughout their crime commission process. So all of these places are important to measure, monitor, and evaluate. Only some are relevant for certain solutions and partnerships. But I'd like to encourage you to think about all of these spaces as you move through the various stages of the hackathon this weekend. Next slide. please. So I'd like to just give you some examples of some of the work that I do where we try to map essentially the crime triangle, crime place interactions, and we integrate data. We integrate data from remote sensing from satellites that help us develop land cover maps. So this is an example from illegal rosewood trafficking in eastern Madagascar. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see data that has been generated through remote sensing and land cover data. On the right side, you can see a participatory risk map of crime triangle spaces. So this is a piece of plastic with markers and stickers asking people to map the crime triangle spaces and places and flows. You can digitize and analyze this data. You can use GIS and other analytical tools to analyze this data, which enables us to predict and infer. This idea of crime prevention and inferring the analytically relevant variables, this enables us to really think like criminals and think like offenders, which may be able to help us move the needle. Next slide, please. So when you put it all together, I just thought so what does it look like? You digitize the spaces and you always get really interesting information. So what you can see for illegal rosewood logging here, again, in eastern Madagascar, there's trees, there's risky spaces, there's risky places. And then you also see that when you engage local people in generating data, they don't follow the rules. And they also give you information that you may not have even thought was relevant to the situation. I never asked people where the illegal logs are actually brought out to sea and where they're brought onto the big container ships that then move them across the Indian Ocean. But local people knew, and they were happy to provide this information. Also, when you disaggregate data, I had a group of women only who helped me do some of this mapping. There were 3 women who had been hired by the illegal loggers to bring them food every day. So these individuals had actually the most up-to-date intelligence of anybody when it came to where, when, and how these illegal loggers were operating in the spaces. They also knew where the loggers were going to go next. So never underestimate the power of silent groups or individuals who are vulnerable and silent to provide really meaningful information about these crime space interactions. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like when you start to make it a little bit more technical. You take GIS and you create heat maps. You create meaningful places of risk ranking. This can help you direct your attention in the future. So what this map on the right offered us was a predictive risk space. We took land cover data, participatory mapping data, forestry data, and then we were able to say, where are these crimes going to happen next so we can move forward. And so this idea of prediction and prevention go hand in hand, and I'd like to encourage you to think that way through the weekend. Next slide, please. So this is another example of this crime place interactions, and this is for sea cucumber fishing in Mexico. My hope was that to show you, examples from Madagascar to Mexico, trees to sea cucumbers, stationary natural resources to somewhat mobile species. You can map the really important places. And so even though illegal sea cucumber fishing happens a lot in the ocean, there are a lot of other meaningful places and spaces that are ripe for intervention, and they also need to be measured. I'm not going to go into the details here, but what the legend shows you is a participatory risk map data, digitization of these crime place interactions. Next slide, please. So I hope that I've offered you some food for thought, some ways of thinking about the problem that might guide you in designing solutions and integrating your solutions with other kinds of sectors. And so this is my Twitter handle. The organizers have my contact information. I'm going to be in and out during the day, but I just want to say, I really think it's a very impressive group of people that that have been brought together today, and I'm really excited about seeing what emerges. So thank you again to the organizers for inviting me to participate, and I'm happy to support whatever happens next on the agenda. Dr. Serrano?
Thank you, Meredith. That was wonderful. And I think what we're going to do in light of time is go right into our next presenter, Dan Morris. And then what we'll do is for Matthew Anderson's presentation, I will tape him after the event and we'll add him into the composition of the proceeds so everyone can hear his presentation on habitat. So yes, so Dan, let me introduce Dan for you. Dan is a principal scientist at Microsoft, and he runs the AI for Earth program, focused on accelerating innovation at the intersection of machine learning and environmental sustainability. His work includes computer vision and applications in wildlife conservation, for example, the AI for Earth species classifications API. And prior to joining AI for Earth, he worked at Microsoft's medical devices group, developing signal processing and machine learning techniques for cardiovascular health monitoring, along with other earlier work on signal processing, machine learning, inputs for systems, etc. So, and then I need to add in, he also likes to play the guitar, but he can talk about that if he'd like in a moment. Over to you, Dan.
If anybody has questions, I'll spend my whole 10 minutes talking about guitars. If we can just forget about animals for today and just talk about guitars, I'm in. So I'm going to talk today about some of our work on using, I'm not going to talk about wildlife trafficking or for the most part, even about anti-poaching applications. So I'm going to talk about some of our work using AI tools for wildlife population monitoring, primarily in the camera trap space. First, quick introduction. I run a program at Microsoft called AI for Earth, which I hope most of you have heard of. And I hope that most of you know it has something to do with Microsoft and something to do with AI and something to do with Earth. But I'm guessing maybe we can't put a finer point on that just yet. So I'm going to try to tell you in 2 slides what the AI for Earth program is, and then dig into talking about how we use AI to accelerate camera trap surveys. So our job overall in AI for Earth is to put the Azure cloud to work for environmental sustainability, and particularly in the conservation and environmental science communities. And we do that in basically 3 ways. We're a grants program. We give stuff away to organizations working at the intersection of machine learning and environmental science. We are a data program, so we are responsible for hosting particularly large geospatial data sets on the cloud that are important to conservation. And then we also build machine learning tools to help make conservation science more efficient. And mostly that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to do about 1 slide each, though, on our grants and data programs. So through our grants program, we give away both financial resources and Azure cloud resources to folks all over the world. And the one thing I want you to take away from this slide is, in particular, if you're doing work that might benefit from cloud resources, please do go visit our grants program. The numbers can be summarized as we have lots of grantees in lots of places. And I wish I could tell you all of our grantee stories, but I can't. Even if I had a longer talk, we couldn't talk about all 600 and something grantees. So you can check out lots of the kinds of work that our AI for Earth grantees are doing at this URL, AKAMS AI for E grantees. I mentioned we are also a data program. So we host particularly the data sets, for the most part, that are really important to environmental science, but too big to bring yourself to the cloud. And that is mostly climate, weather, and remote sensing data for all kinds of applications, many machine learning focused, like automated land cover mapping and climate and weather prediction, but all kinds of applications in environmental sustainability. And maybe of particular interest to today's audience, although in the big data space, our contribution is that Microsoft has lots of hard drives. We also put a lot of time and effort into what I think of as the small data space, particularly around wildlife conservation. We collaborate with some external wildlife conservation friends to host a repository called lila.science, which is a collection, I'd like to think the largest collection out there, of labeled data, particularly labeled imagery related to wildlife conservation. A lot of camera trap data, but also some aerial and drone data and some land cover data to help folks get started, particularly training machine learning models to help for wildlife conservation applications. So please do, if you're looking to get started in this space, you want data to train models, please check out lila.science. And of course, if you have data that you want to contribute to the public and you don't want to deal with it or pay for the storage, that's what we're here for. So please do get in touch with us. I point out that increasingly paper reviewers really like it when you say that you've made your training data available. So often it is a win-win if we can host conservation data sets for you. And that is everything I'm going to say about 99% of the AI for Earth program, which is grants and data. What I'm really going to talk about today is the other part of the program, which is machine learning tools that we build to help conservation scientists spend less time clicking stuff and more time planning conservation. Right now, while we're sitting here on this phone call, conservation scientists all over the world are doing some really boring stuff to get the information they care about out of raw data. And we try to, I always say accelerate, not automate, because I owe you a fancy coffee if you ever hear me talk about automating what conservation scientists do. I think we're a long, I'd like to do that, but we're a long way from that. What we focus on is how can we save environmental scientists time, whether they're reviewing 10 million camera trap images or reviewing 10,000 hours of acoustic recordings to find the handful of species that they're interested in surveying. We want to help them do that more efficiently with machine learning. So we work across all different domains. The story is the same in all of these. There's a boring task that causes conservation questions to get answered very slowly. We'd like to help that happen faster. I'm going to talk today in particular about our camera trap work, although I'm happy to take questions later here or by email about any of the other work that you see here. So let's talk about camera traps, and everything I'm going to talk about today is open source if you want to go tinker with it yourself. I'll have some links at the end too, but GitHub Microsoft camera traps, or you can mail us at cameratraps@microsoft.com. Easy to remember. That's us. So if I run out of time, you can go check out everything I'm talking about at this URL. So really quick calibration. I know we have a lot of wildlife conservation folks on the phone who probably already know what camera traps are. Apologize for a second. In fact, close your ears while I've misdescribed what you do. A camera trap is a camera that is used to monitor wildlife populations, typically placed in remote places and typically set to take anywhere from 1 to 10 pictures anytime an animal walks by. Many of our collaborators also actually don't use motion triggered cameras. They use time triggered cameras, which for statistical purposes of actually estimating wildlife populations can be a huge boost. The reason I talk about that detail is that motion triggering isn't perfect. And time triggering, consequently, even on motion triggered cameras, you get a lot of empty images that have no animals in them at all. And also cameras have no idea whether the thing that walked by was an animal or a person or a bicycle. And so you get all kinds of images that aren't animals. And when you have time triggered surveys, which are great statistically, because that way you know for sure when there weren't animals in front of the camera, you get a lot of, you can imagine putting a camera in the forest, even a wildlife dense forest, and just taking a picture every 5 minutes, get a lot of empty images, sometimes 99.9%. And that makes it real difficult to go through and find the things you're looking for. So there's a huge opportunity for machine learning to accelerate that, which is why actually there's been a ton of fantastic literature in the last few years trying to apply machine learning to this problem. And probably the best known paper in this space was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences 2 years ago. So there's results that showed something like 95% species classification accuracy and 99% detection accuracy, meaning animal or no animal, on data from the Snapshot Serengeti project. But this was by far it's probably the best known paper, probably the largest data set that was analyzed in the computer vision literature, but by no means the only paper in this space. This was followed by a slew of other fantastic papers. We try to keep track of all of them here, AKS Camera Trap Survey. So check that out. If we're missing anything, let us know. All of these fantastic work, the vast majority of this open source using open source data. And so everybody basically trusts the replicability of most of this work. And all of it showed very high classification and detection accuracy, which is why the problem has been completely solved. AI came to the rescue, and all the conservation biologists get to take a long vacation while machines analyze their camera trap images. Obviously, I'm joking. That's not actually what happened. Why do we have all this great work, and yet 99.99% of this work is still done without acceleration by AI? The reality is there's just always a big gap, that last mile of practice between where the academic computer vision literature leaves off and where practical tools kick in. Some of that is machine learning, meaning that many of those results are very replicable, but simply don't generalize outside of the data sets they were trained and evaluated on. And in many cases, those models might generalize, but there's not actually that much that an ecologist can do with a machine learning model on GitHub, which is where we come in. So we focus on some of the more applied and less glamorous applied problems in this space. Particularly species classification is where most of the literature is. It's actually not where we spend most of our time. We spend most of our time helping ecologists separate images that are animal, person, empty, and vehicle. It's boring, but it's important. And we spend our time figuring out, okay, we have this model, we have these results. If we ask an ecologist to now go use, the ecologist who's been working with the same tools for 20 years to go use Microsoft Camera Trap Thing 2020 Professional Edition, they are not going to have a great experience, and they're probably not going to use our tools, even if they would save them some time. So we work really hard on meeting ecologists where they're at with the workflows they're already using. To tell you a little bit more about that, I'm going to give you one brief little bit of computer vision tutorial. And in particular, I'm going to introduce two computer vision words, classifiers and detectors. So classifier, an image classifier tells you what an image is. So a well-trained classifier might tell you that this image is warthog. Doesn't know where the warthog is, it just knows this image is warthog. A detector tells you where in an image something is. So a well-trained detector that we've trained to recognize animals might say that, oh, look, this is one of these things that you taught me to recognize. It's right here. I put a box on it, see it? And you can combine those things in what we call a multi-class detector that would now be able to say where in the image thing is and what it is. I tell you that because our approach to this problem is a little bit unique and hopefully maybe something that folks can leverage for related problems in other spaces. We actually have trained one detector that we kind of think kind of works for everybody in most terrestrial ecosystems. Unfortunately, not in marine ecosystems, but in most terrestrial ecosystems. Anywhere in the world without additional training, that is our detector. And then we also occasionally train ecosystem-specific species classifiers. So we've really broken this into a little bit easier part of the problem that we can kind of solve some of the problem for everybody. And then this harder piece that we kind of have to do on a more case-by-case bespoke basis. So why do we bother with this detector approach? Virtually no ecologists care where in their camera trap images the animals are. So why would we bother with this tool that tells us where in the image something is? Well, number one is this is a very natural way to get rid of images that don't have any animals in them. I mentioned that's a big problem. And basically, I'm simplifying a lot, but if there's a box, then there's an animal. And if there's no boxes, then there's no animal. And this is so important that I put it 3 times on this slide because the number one complaint ecologists who have to deal with camera trap images have is I just hate spending time on 99% of my images that are blank. But it has a couple of other benefits too. We find that detectors actually generalize really, really well to new ecosystems compared to image classifiers. And similarly, if you do want to go classify animals, it makes this a lot easier because if you look at this image, for example, if you actually ask an image classifier to look at this image, even though obviously we see the giraffes, like the giraffes are like 5% of the pixels in this image. If we're actually able to use a detector to find the giraffes and then only ask the classifier to look at the things in those boxes, well, now the giraffes are like 70% of the pixels in this image, and that makes the classification problem a lot easier. And this also makes it a lot easier to handle images with multiple species in them. This is something that the computer vision literature that's mostly focused on image classification kind of skips in a lot of places. And this is, as you can imagine, really important in ecosystems like African savanna, where like half the images have multiple species in them, especially during the day. So we have made one big, as I said, this is kind of like a one size fits all. We don't think there'll ever be a one size fits all species classifier, but we kind of have a one size fits all animal detector that we call the mega detector. Finds animals, people, and vehicles, and so it implicitly finds empty images. If there's no animals, people, and vehicles, it's empty. And we have released this model out into the community on the GitHub page I showed you earlier. For time, I'm not going to show you a live demo of this right now, but if you want to go tinker with it and you happen to have some camera trap images lying around on your hard drive, or you just want to go grab random camera trap images from the internet, you can tinker with it too at this URL, aka camera trap demo. And so typically the way we work with our collaborators is some of the hardest part here is kind of the logistics. It takes a lot of emails to figure out exactly what somebody's data and workflow and their goals are. We ask questions like, how many empty images do you have? If you only have 1% of your images are not animals, we probably can't help you that much. If you say you have 99% of your images are empty, we can save you a lot of time. We work really hard with ecologists to get many terabytes of data from them from whatever remote areas they're in. Occasionally, we still ship our drives around the world. And then we use, one of the great things about the cloud is we're using no computers right now. And then yesterday we ran 10 million images for one of our collaborators, and we can sort of spin up the compute we need on demand to do that. And then typically the most common way that our collaborators end up working with our data, again, I mentioned that we try very hard not to ask them to use like brand new tools they've never heard of. So we've worked to integrate the results from our tools into a couple of popular tools that are out there for reviewing camera trap images before AI existed. One of them in particular is called Timelapse, and we've worked really closely with the developer of Timelapse so that if you are a time-lapse user, you can go ahead and do what you're doing, except now you can also load the results of our AI models and basically ask Timelapse not to show you all the images that machine learning says probably have nothing in them. And the last thing I'll say is we also have, so we are able to put the same model to work with different cloud infrastructure by exposing it through a real-time API. And this is not The web demo is one thing that uses this. This is not, the web demo I linked to before where you'll upload like 2 images from your hard drive is obviously not how we work with collaborators that have 10 million images. But that same real-time API that supports our web demo also supports the anti-poaching cases that use our same API, where it's not animals they're looking for, but it's actually the person class that they're really interested in. So we're able to put the same model to work for conservation in a very, very different environment with just a little bit of different cloud infrastructure. And I will actually stop there. I'll flash these slides by you that show other neat areas where we work on of doing some of the same general principle, trying to save ecologists time with machine learning. And I will stop there. Feel free to reach out to me by email if you have questions. We're easy to find.
Fantastic, Dan. Thank you so much. And I think if you could send me a link to your briefing, we can post that to the board and make sure everybody has all the links that they can tinker with. And then great. Thank you so much. And so next I'm going to introduce, we're going to get into the subtracks. We just have 2 additional presentations. Let me share my screen again. And then we'll be wrapping up this session, getting right into the specifics on the subtracks for our participants today. We're fortunate to have Dr. Al James, who is a PhD in speech recognition on mobile devices, where he researched the effects of cellular signal degradation on the accuracy of voice conservation interfaces in conjunction with Motorola. And then his colleague is AJ, also Al Jamison, who is an engineer with the same company, Ometria, which was founded by Dr. James. So over to you both. Here is your slide.
Hi everyone, how's it going? So I'm Al James. I'm here with AJ to mentor the automation subtrack. Now we feel slightly like imposters here because we don't have any background in ecology or conservation whatsoever. And after listening to those great presentations, we feel slightly out of our depth. But we do have a background in machine learning and data science. So we're hoping to apply some of that kind of what's normally used for commercial gain to actual proper gain inside the world and everything else. We're really excited about that. So earlier we heard about how these illegal trade networks of fish bellers go throughout the span over the globe and how the concept of convergence is really important to kind of identify and map them. And the meaning for the automation subtrack is to look at using algorithms to start to do that effectively. So we're going to be using some data from, could be things like undercover kind of videos or text or whatever. We're going to try to start to surface some information to start to map those graphs out, identify kind of places, people, and things that might be talked about. This might result in a data set that can be used in other places. Perhaps that can be geocoded and put in something else, but we don't really know yet. We're going to look at some options out there. We've come up with a couple of ideas initially, but hopefully the teams will come up with other ideas. One idea is to exactly what I said a second ago, to kind of use the undercover video to kind of transcribe it, translate it, and extract the entities from it, try to work out things being spoken about so that we can index a large number of these videos and spot the kind of connections between things. We're also looking at things like potentially things like a web crawler to go through photos on somewhat shady websites and start to understand things that might be around things that are potentially being traded that shouldn't be, things that might need to be looked at for. But hopefully the teams will come up with other ideas as well. In some cases, we're gonna have to be creative about how we get training data, because one of the problems here is that a lot of this uncover data is quite sensitive and we can't always share it. So we're gonna have to do things like looking at photos online, try to build data sets for this and everything as well. But you know, it's a hackathon. We're going to build a minimal viable product. There's some great, as Dan was talking about, some great kind of tools out there now for doing things like machine learning online, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to harness some of those things. So some of Azure machine learning, some of the Amazon and Google things. We're going to encourage the teams to kind of use the things that already exist out there. There's also great open source tools as well. So we're here to mentor them and kind of mentor the teams and help advise them on the best tools to use. AJ, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, thanks, Al. Yeah, so my name's AJ. I'm the engineering director at Ometria. And like Al, I don't have any background in wildlife or ecology. I do some charity work, but mostly with the homeless charities in London and the UK. But my involvement today is more around helping shape the problem domain from a technical perspective. determining what sort of solutions of these perhaps suggested ideas or other ideas that we might like to tackle, and try and get a minimum viable product, an MVP, out before the end of the weekend. Any questions, anyone? We all seem a bit quiet.
Right, we do have a Slack channel for our automation track participants, and we can certainly see if we have any questions at the end. We have just one more presentation, and then we'll jump right into questions. So prepare your questions on the chat if you would, please. Great, thank you so much. And I appreciate you jumping in at such late notice, so thank you again. All right, so we're now over to David Alvarez. He is a geospatial scientist at Esri, and I'm going to abbreviate your intro. David, you have a very long resume, but we probably could not be doing the work that we're doing today without David's help. He's just been amazing in getting us all set up on our portals and the Esri licenses and so forth. And also, again, a shout out to Dan for his generosity of providing the $20,000 Azure credits for the automation track. So over to you, David.
Good morning, everyone. I also am not an ecologist. My background is in geodesy. But I just want to give you a kind of a brief. So everybody has a, excuse me, have a license for ArcGIS Pro, and at the same time, several extensions. So the screen, basically the slide that you have there is the way that if you want to download ArcGIS Pro so you can work on your machine, that's the procedure. You go to basically the settings of the user, and it will pop up that screen, which allow you to download ArcGIS Pro. Next slide. Everybody has the extensions, the 3D analyst, spatial analyst, geostatistical, the locate XD, image analyst, and the data interoperability. So with those tools, if you need anything else, just let me know. But for all the work, I think so those are the key extensions that everybody should have to work. The way that the data is organized, so we have a main catalog that every group has access to it, and every single team has its own group. You can put all the data that you want in that group, and group A will not be able to see what data that they came out with team B. So that each group has its own data, but we're sharing a core data source. That's it. Odin, back to you.
Okay, David, so right, so we will present all of these slides, but yeah, we've given everyone access to their portal, given them username, password, so we'll be online throughout the weekend to help with any of the questions, and again, we'll provide these briefings to everyone as well. All right, so just a quick oh, this is not a signed non-disclosure agreement, this is a signed non-disclosure agreement that we need from everyone if you're participating in this track, just to primarily for sensitivity of the data, not so much as the data itself that we're gathering is sensitive, but when we do an aggregate of our analysis, oftentimes it can become sensitive. It will also protect you, the team, with of your work, so that we can make sure through the oversight of Andrea and his team to ensure that what we are releasing and publications of your work will be cited to you, but we need to do that at least a little bit of scrutiny to make sure that that's protected. The data catalog link is here. We provided maybe, I don't know, 40, 50 different sources of data for you to mine from to help you build out your projects. And now I'm going to share with you all of the wonderful mentors who are here standing by for you all weekend long. We have our geospatial mentors over here. Brandon Yuan, he was the lead to bringing together all of our mentors. So a special shout out to Brandon for all of his leadership. Laura Roy is also a lead geospatial analyst, can help you with visualizing maybe your final project. You've met with David just now. Kevin, Dustin, Dan, and Rachel are all here to assist in any of your needs on Slack or otherwise. And then our two automation experts, Al and AJ. So here's the schedule. This is all in Eastern Standard Time. So this is when people will be online. Just know that we're all going to be crowdsourcing and helping one another as best that we can, and get you the answers that you need as soon as possible, and on the technical side. And then we will close with this track. We will have judges. And so I'd like to cite the judges here that we haven't heard from yet. Brian Raymer from ESRI, Liz Lyon from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Daniel Cole from the Smithsonian Institute, Dr. Vasant Sagan from Geo St. Louis University, and then our two automation experts, Al and AJ. So with that, we're back over to Sanjana and Harry. If there are any questions, we'll let you guys field that.